I'm going to go ahead and introduce Rashad Daoudi. Rashad is a longtime professional in the sales industry, having worked across multiple higher ed clients. He's also an individual entrepreneur, and he has written a book called How Not to Sell, a Sales Survival Guide. Rashad and I know each other from actually his sales days with one of his higher ed companies. I think he's going to talk a little bit about that before. I remember working with him, and I think we'll have a chance to engage a little bit today in dialogue about that. But I just love the idea of talking about sales from the perspective, instead of what we normally get is a lot of rah, this is the greatest way to do things, and I've never had a problem in my life selling stuff. Rashad, he's going to be down to earth and honest about the things that he's learned in his history on how not to sell, some of the places where there's been some missteps or some fires, which I think is a reminder to all of us that we all have our own stories about when we were less than successful, and we're not alone in all of that. So I'm super excited and really appreciate you taking the time with us today, and I will turn it over to you to take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Joel. And thanks everybody for being here. I saw all over the country. We're in St. Louis, Salt Lake City. I think we might have been someone in France potentially, definitely Vancouver. So that's great. It's awesome. Thank you so much. And I know as salespeople and entrepreneurs yourself, you're exceptionally busy. So to give up an hour of your time is a lot. So I really appreciate it. Joel does too. And I want to make this as advantageous as possible. And if you can, leave this webinar with one or two big ideas of how you can improve your selling skills, this will all be worth it. And Joel, in terms of our relationship, I'm going to get to the story of calling on UA when you were there, University of Arizona, because that's definitely a lesson on how not to sell. As I talk about siloing decision makers, and I think I was working exclusively on you that I forgot about everybody else in the process and calling on them. So that's something we'll talk about in chapter 5 of the book, Working Decision Makers. But what's also interesting is how this webinar came about, right? Because I didn't do any prospecting or marketing towards you directly. It was just posts on LinkedIn that I had been putting about my book and about sales in general, which over time, resonated with Joel. And when he needed someone to do the webinar, here I was. So we'll talk about that a lot, and prospecting as well, because sometimes the best prospecting you can do is no prospecting at all, and just having marketing in more organic ways, whether it's through content that you're writing or just other ways to get clients in without having to do direct sales. So we'll talk about all that. Let me share my screen here, and I'm going to put up just one slide that I have. Okay, great. So again, sales and management for 15 years. I have worked with Pearson Education, Blackboard, McGraw-Hill. My last position was with Salesforce. And had just a ton of experience. And so that's where most of the book comes from. A lot of the stories of my failures came from the time that I was selling textbooks and higher education technology. From there, for the last now 5 years, I've been focusing on much more being a business owner, an entrepreneur. I was a realtor. I still am a licensed realtor in the state of Texas. So I've been doing a lot of different things as a business owner. I did just get a new client this past week that I'll talk about. So I'm really excited to be working with Tennessee Book Company. It's a large K through 12 education provider where I'm going to be training their new salesperson they just hired, helping get their CRM up and running, and just training the person so that he can go out and start executing on sales. So I think this will speak well to the audience because we have an excess of 100 people here, and so there's a good variety of folks that are working more on the corporate sales side. Maybe you work for a venue and you're trying to get Salesforce to hold, one of their Dreamforce events where you are. Or perhaps you're an entrepreneur who's, an independent business planner who's trying, again, to find businesses and other venues to work with you. So I have the experience from both sides. And the book kind of tells both of those stories because the first 3 chapters are more about setting yourself up for success. The next 7 chapters is about really how to sell or how not to sell. And then the final 2 talk more about relationships and ethics. So the book is broken up nicely, bringing in all my experience. And I should mention I'm also this fall actually going to law school. I just got accepted. Now the UT there looks great. You might think it's University of Texas, University of Tennessee, but no, in fact, it's University of Toledo. But that's fine. Toledo University is a phenomenal school. And when I get a full scholarship, or I did get a full scholarship, I'm very excited. So kind of for everything I've been doing for the last 20 years, working in business and management, marketing, sales, you name it, I'm just taking a total different turn with my life, and hopefully I'll be a licensed attorney here in a few years. So kind of covering a little bit about myself, let's talk about the book. So again, the title is How Not to Sell. And the book is an incredible book. In fact, it's so good that I have hardly sold any copies. So the book will really teach you a lot. Now, that's not totally true because I have sold a couple. This is the last royalty check that I received from Half Price Books for $9. So the book not only does it tell you how not to sell, but I can also teach you a class on how not to sell a book. Because really, once I finished writing the book, I didn't put the sales into it because really it wasn't something that I wanted to sell. I wrote the book because, I just wanted to get my story out there. I wanted to share what I thought was really good experiences. I was going through a time in my life where I wanted a creative outlet and to work on something. So I absolutely love the book. It took a year and a half of daily, couple hours a day writing this book. So it took a lot of time and I love it. But again, at the same time, once I was done with it, I moved on to something else. So I think as we talk here about sales, the main thing you really need when you're a salesperson is the love for it. If you're looking at sales as a job or something that you have to do as opposed to something that you want to do and that you love, and that sales becomes something that it's not even a job. It's just you going out every day being yourself. You just happen to be selling. That's the way you want to go about it. You really want to love it and make it as authentic as possible. And so I'll talk about, my own experience where especially in the second half of my career, that was no longer what I really enjoyed doing. Sales became more of a job, almost a chore in some way. So it's nothing about sales in general. It's just more about kind of my attitude towards it. And so I think there's ways you can definitely avoid kind of that pitfall that I fell into. If you have any questions during this, feel free to just put it right in the QA, like Joel said, and we'll answer the questions as we're going. This will be a little bit unstructured. We're going to go through, a little bit of every chapter in the book. So if we can hit on, a couple of big ideas from each chapter, I think we'll be successful. Because the biggest mistake I made with this book is that it's too long, I'll say. If I had cut out about 70% of this book and just left the 30% that is gold, I think I would have been a lot happier with it. I like to joke that this is the first ever sales book that's also a novel. It's 170 pages, but it's a phenomenal book, and it's really good stories in there. And so what I want to do in this presentation is just focus on that 30%. So as we go through each chapter, we'll kind of hit on the big idea of it. And hopefully, again, you'll get 2 to 3 big ideas. My publisher, when he read this book, I was maybe the 20th book that he published, and that was 4 years ago. I think he just crossed his 500th. He has just gone off the charts with his business, Atmosphere Press. And he told me from reading my manuscript, the one thing that stood out more than anything is the chapter 9, which is don't email the proposal. Because every time he would get a proposal together for an author to publish a book with him, he would have a call with them, he'd write the proposal, and he would email it. Emailing a proposal, unless you are certain, that's 100% certain you're going to get it, and it's just a formality to send them the proposal or the contract, you're really putting yourself at a huge disadvantage, right? You're just sending the email down some tunnel. You don't know what's going on at the other end. Is the client even reading it? Did they open it? Are they sharing it with other people? Do they have questions, right? Are they confused about something? Please don't ever email the proposal. And so he, really understood that he needs to call people. As soon as he has a proposal ready, I'm going to call you. I'm going to walk you through this, and we're going to talk about the things that you don't understand. And I tell a great story in this with Rice University. When I first got hired at Salesforce, they threw me right into the middle of a huge proposal to Rice University for their alumni and advancement department. So it was putting 300 employees on one system to do all their outreach to all the prospective students and former alumni. This was about a $1.5 million sale. And the client was pressing me, I need you to send this to me. We need it now. We have 2 other proposals. We need to put them together, compare, and then make our decision. So I was going through hoops, doing everything I could, got the proposal together. And rather than call the client and say, listen, I've got this proposal, you know, it's for $1.5 million. There's a lot in here. Can we sit down for 30 minutes or whatever, bring the other decision makers and let's talk. And she was adamant, you know, no, Rashad, you know, we're very busy. It's the exam season's about to start. We got all these campaigns going. We just prefer if you could email. We understand what's going on, just email it. And so I did email. And what happened for the next 6 months, I never heard from her. She would hardly respond to my emails, and they ended up deciding going with somebody else. So I really should have pushed for that meeting. And you know what, if it creates tension, if she says something like, listen, we're not going to let you in here, just send the proposal, then you know what, I'm not going to send you the proposal. And I think there's a big, and a lot of the theme in my book that I talk about is the idea of tension, right? And tension is something good, not just for sales, but in life in general. Because typically, if there's tension going on between you and someone else, that usually means that you're speaking your truth. You're sticking by what you believe in. You're being honest, right? You're really doing what you need, because the salesperson, you deserve something as well. It's not just about the client giving them everything that you need or they want, right? Because it just makes you look weak. You're catering to them. You need to stand up for yourself. And yeah, maybe it was bad that I even got myself in a position where I have to like force this meeting, or there is that tension. That might be a sign of something else going on that I need to fix about my whole process leading up to that outreach about the proposal. But in general, whether you're courting someone for a romantic relationship, or it's someone in your family that has something you need to talk to, or a friend, or again, a business client, you know, having some of that tension can be good, especially when there's some emotion invoked there, because typically once you cross that tension and get to the other side, you've got relationships that are much stronger. I mean, think of some of your most important relationships in your life. Think about how many fights you've probably had with that person, right? Everyone on here can think of that example. So with sales, it's no different. You don't want to fight with your clients, of course, but you just have to really ask, or you know, you deserve respect for yourself. So that's just, you know, one of the themes of many in the book. So let's go ahead and open this up. You can see my screen, right, Joel? You've been able to see everything. Okay, great. So real quick, so again, Atmosphere Press, you published it. If anyone's looking for any illustrative work done, Eric Nyamore did a lot of the illustrations, phenomenal illustrator. So if there's any chapters here that jumps out, go ahead and just throw it into the QA and we can jump right to any of these chapters. Otherwise, we can just start with chapter 1 and kind of just go through. And again, we're going to be covering, you know, a mile wide and an inch deep, right? So we're just going to kind of be hitting on little things, and I'll put my email address at the end. And if anyone wants to reach out just to talk about anything, you know, let's do that. We can go a little bit deeper. And again, feel free to jump in. And, you know, ultimately the big thing, well, let's just get in real quick here to the preface. So again, the idea of failure, right? I start each chapter off with a quote here, because, you know, if you're not failing in life, not just in sales, but in other things in general, I'm sure you've heard this before, you know, you're really not trying, right? And that's the most important thing, is that you're trying. You know, we all know the cliched Wayne Gretzky line, you know, you might miss 100 shots if you take them, but you're never going to make one if you don't try, right? Something to that regard. And another reason why maybe reading this book or just trying things in general is this image right here, the idea of positive asymmetry. If you've never heard of Nassim Taleb, he is an outstanding author. He's got some incredible books. One of them is called Anti-Fragile, that I highly, highly recommend. In fact, if that's the only thing you remember from this is the book Anti-Fragile, and you go read it, this whole time together will be worth it. And so he makes a big point in the book with the idea of what decisions can you make in your life that have positive asymmetry, meaning that the upside is way bigger than the downside. And so I put this in the book because, hey, if you buy my book and read it, at worst, you're going to lose $10 and maybe a few hours of your time, right? But what's the upside of reading my book? Or what's the upside of attending this webinar, right? You might get one idea that leads to a sale that gets you more commission, which in turn might lead to an improved life, maybe help you get a better job. We can talk in chapter 10, Plan to Change Jobs, about how you're inevitably going to be finding another job, especially if you're a good salesperson, or even more so if you're a bad salesperson, because then you're definitely going to be looking to switch companies. So there's a lot of upside with things. So really just in general in life, when you're making decisions, kind of look for those opportunities where there's way more upside than there is downside. And so positive asymmetry being important concept. So I don't know, Joel, are there anything in the Q&A so far? Or can I just keep rolling through?
Nothing yet. Keep on rolling through.
Okay. All right, great. So chapter 1, get experience. This may not pertain to everybody here because some of you on the phone might be in a job that you love. You know, you're going to be there for many years. And so it's not about getting experience to that next job. But for most salespeople, when you're first starting out, you know, that first sales job is likely not going to be one that you're in for, you know, several years, right? I have a quote towards the end of this book, or not a quote, a statistic that talks about something, I think a third of salespeople leave their job after, I think it was 3 years, and then another like 50% are actively thinking about moving at any one time. So the idea of getting experience, again, is important, not just for life, right? You're not just going to know things because you're told them or because you believe it. You're going to believe things because you experience them. And so I started sales when I was 17, selling credit cards for MBNA. I wasn't even old enough to have a credit card, but here I am selling them to people. So that was life back in 1997. But I knew I liked sales. It was dynamic. It was fun. So I stayed with it. And then the first job I ever had was selling epoxy floor coatings. And so when I talk about here this headline, and to anyone that does publish a book, let it be known that iTunes or iBooks is the worst formatting imaginable. So you can see a lot of things like this where this heading is not at all where it should be, but that's fine. So one of the concepts from my time, and this was Thermal Chem, was the name of the company, first job I had out of college, where I sold epoxy floor coatings, right? My dad paid $80,000 for me to go to college so I could sell epoxy floor coatings when I graduated, but that's fine too. I got a scholarship to law school, so he's happy. So one of the things that I learned from that job at Thermal Chem was learning to walk away from things. And this goes in line with tension. This goes with the idea of standing up for yourself. And this was a floor that I was going to sell where the owner of the company was trying to drive down price on me as much as he could. And so we acquiesced, we gave him what he wanted. And in turn, the job turned out to be just really bad because the contractor forced himself, or we chose to get into this position that was going to cause an issue. But we were so eager to get the sale that we didn't just think about ourselves first and what we needed. And as a salesperson, if you can walk away, it's one of the strongest positions that you can be in. And don't walk away not just because you have so many other sales, you don't have time for it. Walk away because the client is not doing what they need to do. And they're going to see that, people, and they might say, well, fine, if you're going to walk away, forget you. And that's okay because you're probably not going to get the sale anyways. You know, people want to be directed in this life, especially when it comes to a sale. So the more you can kind of say, you know, I'm asking you these questions for a specific reason, or there's, you know, the pricing is this for a certain reason. This is what you're getting. And I talk more about this in chapter 7, the difference between price and value. Because if you get into something where you're talking about price too much, well, you've already put yourself in a rabbit hole that's going to be hard to get out of, right? So you want to talk as much as you can about value up front, then get to your price. So things like learning to walk away, seeing the job through, again, don't give a price. And this was the image that kind of encapsulates all of chapter 1, which is the idea of, you know, a young person in there. Why do you want this job? I wanted to eventually get a better one. So I like this image, and that kind of tells a lot about the idea of and not just, you know, with sales, but again, like anything else, where you're going to try something new, you're not sure if you like it, well, get the experience, put yourself in it as much as possible. You know, I spent the last 6 months reading, you know, endless law books to know if I even wanted to go to law school, right? To get that sense of, is this something I want to do for the next 3 years? So that might be how it is for you in sales. You know, you might have to take a job for a couple of years in sales to realize, you know, maybe I don't like this. Maybe I want to do something else. So I just encourage you to try new things, let the process lead you where it might, but also, you know, put the full effort in that's required to be successful. And if you're going to do something, do it right. So again, chapter 1 may not totally apply to you, but I closed it out with this question of, do you like sales? Because again, that's got to be the biggest thing. It's not just sales, it's just you as a person going out, interacting with others. And yeah, you have a product to sell, but you love it. You love life. You love, you know, your coworkers. So I think it takes a mindset beyond just selling. So this is also a cornerstone, not just of the book, but of my whole career, which is the idea of luck and circumstances. I had a image in here that didn't make the cut for some reason. iTunes just eliminated it, but it's a pie, and basically the pie is broken into 4 equal slices: 25% art, 25% skill, 25% luck, 25% circumstances. That's the formula for a successful salesperson, because you can really be the best salesperson out there, and there are just circumstances that make it extremely difficult to succeed. It's not an excuse, it's just the reality. If you blow out your number one year by $700,000, like I did in 2007, it's going to be hard to repeat that the following year. So there's certainly another level of work that you're going to have to take yourself to, but you can also be, of course, the worst salesperson out there, or maybe not the worst, the not the best, and rise to the top, right? We've seen this in life. In fact, Nassim Taleb has another book called Fooled by Randomness that talks about how it's not just an exception that sometimes the least qualified make it to the top. It's almost the rule in a lot of ways that you see people climb to the top through their own success. Sure, I mean, you have to create your luck and circumstances, of course. You got to go out there, you got to hustle, you got to put yourself in position, but a lot of times it's going to be things out of your control that may dictate what ultimately happens. So you're just going to have to, be okay with that. And again, allow that to take its course, the things that are out of your control. But again, just managing or controlling what you can. So this was a big part of it. And as we go through, and the image that I came up here was Lewis and Clark, right? And so like Lewis and Clark, they were two obviously very seasoned professional explorers, right? But I mean, Thomas Jefferson, after we bought the Louisiana Purchase, and he had to beg some of the representatives in Congress to actually get us to buy Louisiana Purchase. It was the greatest deal ever. And he had to convince people that were so against it. And so he ended up picking Lewis and Clark to explore this territory, right? And so they're looking over the territory, like, we're going to kill it in this territory, right? But he could have just as easily picked, Smith and Williamson, 2 other just as equally good explorers that could have easily been the ones to do Louisiana Purchase. And I'm sure there were other highly qualified explorers, but Lewis and Clark, through, other circumstances, maybe they were the ones chosen, and they ultimately, their names are etched in American history forever. So a lot of those things can, make the decision about, kind of what your results are. But certainly the luck, the skill and the art are a big part of that. So this is, okay, so Paul came, let me get that out of the way. Okay, all right, great. So I think that's probably pretty good for, this is a bit of a longer chapter, but I do love this graph that I made here, because this was kind of the first half of my career. Now, the get lucky with circumstances, that's being a little bit self-deprecating. I was Rookie of the Year in 2005, a top performer in 2007. I hustled like crazy, but I also got a sale in 2006, a big year for me as well, where I worked my biggest competing company at Pearson Education. They owned Prentice Hall and Allen & Bacon. So there were 2 competing companies, but they were both owned by the same company. And so halfway into the year, they made a decree that said any sale that was made by one of the competitors, the sales rep for the other competitor would get credit for it as well. I mean, that is like a salesperson's, dream. It should almost be like illegal when you think about it, because me and him were going, I think it actually probably was illegal. So the 2 of us were going after this English sale, and he was sort of leading. I knew that he was going to get more votes, so I just took my foot off the pedal and said, all right, go, take it. And he ended up getting a $120,000 sale, which was manually put into my territory as having also made the sale. So you see that there is some luck and some circumstances. It's kind of outrageous that happened, but I was out there working extremely hard every day, but it was something totally on my control, a decision made by a higher up in the company that ultimately helped lead me to have, a really good year. And then the second half of my career was more of this formula here: get experience, get a better job, milk the salary, and then get the hell out. Right. So again, not the best way that I want to tell others, but again, that's the book, is how not to sell. So this is how not to go about the best way to get your a career going. So again, I don't want to make this look like I'm in any way, trying to think of a good word. Because I worked my tail off during that time. But again, as I mentioned, the second half, as I started to lose my love for the sales and knew I was kind of on the way out, this is sort of what was happening. And I was also picking some maybe not the best companies to work with. One being a company that Joel, who I ended up calling on at University of Arizona, a company that really just had not a very good product. So as good of a salesperson as you can be, product does matter. So keep that in mind, because if you are with a company now and you're thinking, well, maybe there is, you don't want to use it as an excuse, because, you can overcome deficiencies in your product, certainly, but product does matter. Okay, so we're about...
Rashad, really quick, one of the things that resonates with me is that having spent 25 years in higher ed, as someone that was called upon all the time by technology vendors and equipment vendors and everything else. One of the things I do notice, and I think you've illustrated here the point, sales is very hard to do all the time, like all day long when that's your full job. That's a hard life to lead. I know a lot of our people today, if you're a venue operator, sales is just a piece of what you do, because you're also managing the events and leading staff and doing all those things. And for many of us, even for me, I have sales as part of my job at Unique Venues, and it oftentimes is my least favorite thing to do because it's hard. It's not easy. You're not always successful. You have to handle rejection while all those pieces of it. But it reminds me why it felt like I would see like this every 3-year cycle. Like my Chronos timekeeping rep would change every 3 years. My sales rep would be different, because I think they were following a similar hierarchy to you, which is get experience, get passionate about it, but then burn out on it a little bit and move on to the next job where you could fire up that passion and that energy again for something different. But to find a salesperson that can do that for 20 or 25 years is tough, which is why I think for some of our venue operators, if you've been in those roles for 20, 25 years, that's a hard part of your job, even if it's only 15%, to be focused on that, selling the same thing over and over and over again. It's hard for anybody to do.
I think you said it exceptionally well. I mean, and that takes balance too. I think that's not getting too high or too low. I mean, when I hear of people that have been with companies 20 years or doing staying in marriages 20 plus years, whatever it is, I have so much respect for that level of fidelity to really be able to stick with something. And yeah, I was a bit, I mean, you said it perfectly, Joel. When I got my first real position or job, I would say with Pearson, after the thermal chem, I loved that job. And I used to drive home on a Friday night at 7 o'clock, get the mail, and there would be all these book requests in there. And it was like the funnest thing. I loved it. I'd stay up like a Friday night till 1 a.m., like just sending out book requests, writing emails to the professors. I was 24 years old. I should have been out probably partying. Instead, I'm writing emails to professors. But it was so much fun. But you're right, Joel. I got pretty burned out after about 4 years, and that's when I switched to a management position. And then I kind of started switching positions a little bit too frequently. So I think that balance does help a lot. And the more you can get, really, maybe some of you have heard this, the idea of, turn a have to into I get to, right? So, if you're waking up and you're starting to say things, oh, I have to go to this meeting, or I have to get on this call, or that's maybe a sign that, maybe it is time for a change. But I think keeping that balance and understanding, that not everything in life is perfect. Things can be difficult when things go really well, not getting, too crazily excited. That's how you're going to keep that balance through your life. So, so we move on to chapter 3. So these first 3 chapters are kind of the setup for somebody to have success, right? You have to get some experience, you have to get a good territory, and then get a decent manager, right? These things are all important for you to set up yourself for success. And then one of the things that I wrote that I loved in the book, and this was the moment that I knew I had an actual book that I was going to write. This was about 5 months into the process. I had writing, a little bit each day, and I had a manuscript. I remember it was a Sunday afternoon. I was playing an online poker tournament, and all of a sudden this idea popped into my head about doing the different types of bosses. And I just jumped out of my seat, and I thought, oh my God, this is so cool. And I just started writing, and I thought about all my managers I've had in the past, of 15 different managers, and I broke them all down into these 5 types. And the year that I was a manager, I was the prover. That was the person that, really just was always trying to maybe overcompensate, or I was a younger person. I had my first management job at 27. So I was really trying to prove things to everybody. I think that caused some issues for me. So that's important for you as a salesperson, or really any job you have, is to find a manager that you can work well with. you know, that you're going to have some good cohesion with. And, you know, you should be interviewing them. You know, when you go for a job or really, you know, anything, you should be interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. And so I love this little graph that I put up here. You know, instead of you impressing them, you know, they should impress you, right? Instead of you answering the next question, you should be asking them questions, right? And it's almost similar with maybe a client in some ways, right? That you should want to do business with them as much as they want to do business with you, right? Because this is a person that you might have to interact with and deal with for years to come. So setting up that success, and here's some questions that I have in here about, and then other tips for how to vet that company properly. And then I go into more detail later in the book about planning to change jobs. So I really like this chapter, things like a trial week, doing a project or presentation. Again, this may not apply to everybody because you're not necessarily looking for a new job or interviewing for one. And this was my little image here about, you know, the salesperson. Now, don't worry about him. He's just my manager. And I can't tell how many times I've gone into meetings and the manager was just a stand-in, you know, figurehead that just showed I had someone that was holding me accountable. So yeah, that was, so then as you go into now, the second part of the book, you know, that this gets into the real selling. So my publisher, you know, really had to focus me on not saying so much of the existential crises and things going on in my life is related to sales, but keep it focused on what is truly sales. And so this is where that starts in the book, the idea of prospecting. If you haven't seen the movie Boiler Room, I highly recommend you go see it. It's a cutthroat movie about sales that is, you know, pretty wild movie, definitely PG-13, if not rated R. So yeah, but very, very good with Vin Diesel, Giovanni Ribisi, Ben Affleck, awesome movie. So yeah, so the idea of how to prospect, because a lot of it is going to be that hard work and that hustle. You know, everyone here, you might have different ways you go about prospecting, but there is going to be a lot of calling, a lot of emailing, a lot of trade shows, a lot of networking, a lot of LinkedIn posts, a lot of, you know, whatever fits in that's going to make it the most natural to you. But I went pretty granular with this, breaking it down into things like when to prospect, what time of day, what time of week, right, to do it. And so that might be kind of anecdotal, some of that evidence that says, when should you call? Oh, the best time, don't call it a Monday at 9 a.m. because the person might be too busy and they don't want to deal with you. Or don't call on a Friday late in the day because they're trying to get home. I mean, I kind of think that's all like hogwash. I think you can call really anybody at any time if they're going to be upset because, you know, whatever, they're in a bad mood or they're in a good mood, or, you know, it's just going to kind of be a lot of, again, that randomness, that luck and circumstances where you might just call someone, you know, right at the exact right time, or maybe at the wrong time. So again, it's about just increasing the numbers as much as you can. If you go back to the quote, you know, play the numbers. This is a contact sport. The more people you contact, the better you'll do. And so I just think to myself, you know, if I had posted on LinkedIn, you know, 100 posts in the last year instead of 5, maybe 10 other Joels would have messaged me and said, hey, do you want to do a webinar or do something to help my sales team? So I think you really do have to increase. You have to put yourself out there as much as possible, and, you know, do things like, you know, do your research, have some game plan before you're going to go out and actually contact. And a big part I make of this, and this goes again about do not email the proposal, is as much as you can call your clients. If you are going to be more of that one directional prospecting, and that might be an issue in and of itself that you're even having to email or cold call people, and maybe, you know, you want to get with a company that does more marketing or advertising, the clients come to you, or does more like, you know, interesting ways to prospect. But emailing and calling is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I would say calling is the way to go. And I do like this chart that I made here, you know, that shows the different reasons why phone can help so much. And I just love the idea of like, even like a gatekeeper, right? If you have to send an email to a secretary to get an appointment with someone else, I mean, she probably gets 100 emails a day. Like Joel said, how many emails he got from salespeople. They'll just delete it. You'll never hear from them. But if you call, maybe a quick hello, you can immediately break through that tension right away. Oh my God, it's Salesforce. I don't want to talk to you. But you've got them on the phone. They've picked up. You've got a better chance to adapt yourself. You can do a 30-second elevator pitch rather than some email that they're not going to read, right? It's one directional email versus phone where you can, you know, get some dialogue going. You send an email, as soon as you click send, again, you have no idea what's going on the other end of that. So call where it makes sense, where you can. I mean, you all know your business and what's best, but if you're thinking on the phone or thinking before you reach out, that you want to call, but maybe you're a little scared because, you know, calling people is scary, especially if you're going to sell something. It's not a fun thing to do, but it can be fun. You can make it fun, and you got to have thin skin, you know, and not, or sorry, you have to have thick skin, a real thick skin. Because yes, you will get, you know, things maybe said to you, don't take me off your list. Man, I remember it's an ego buster too, right? I remember calling people from Salesforce and then telling me to take them off their list. And I'm thinking, you know, this is Salesforce here, but they don't care. So maybe an email to start, but then a call later, right? Also health-wise, it's just more fun. It's more dynamic. You know, writing too many emails just kill your fingers. So another thing I really love, and this is where I sort of differentiate my reaching out to Joel, or how I came into contact with Joel to do this presentation versus my way that I would more often prospect, which would just be prospecting, which would be an email or a call. It would generate a lead. I'd get a customer. That would end. But the way you should be doing it is, instead of that prospecting, focus on networking. So the networking becomes leads, leads become customers, then the customers feed back into that networking. So in the case of Joel, yeah, he wasn't a customer, but you know, I mean, we did build a relationship through my time calling on him. He got into my network. We still kept in touch. I remember he had commented on a couple of posts that I had made, you know, maybe a year ago or so. And so we had that relationship going. And so now Joel's officially in the network. And so I can see other, you know, maybe potentially leads, or we're sharing things, or we're just keeping that relationship going. And so this is going to keep that funnel going, as opposed to just that one-dimensional prospecting that often ends after the person's a customer and that's it, as opposed to then using your customers to get more customers. And talk about how not to sell. I mean, that was probably the most detrimental thing that I did in my career, was not use the people that I had made sales with to help me make sales. It's just so important. And so I talk later about this in the chapter about don't rush to demo your product, because demoing can really put you in a bad position for a lot of reasons. And if we have time, we can go over a couple of those. And so the demo may not be what you want to do. So instead, you know, get the person to do a trial maybe, or to talk to one of your existing customers, or to do other things that don't just demo the product, but having a happy customer talk to that prospect for you. Certainly advertising. And then, you know, overall, like all of life, and we've talked about this a minute ago, is about the idea of balance. You should have a little bit of leads coming in from calls, do some emails, you know, have some advertising, do some, you know, original content, maybe on LinkedIn, have some referrals. You should have a steady stream coming in from all of those different sources. And then the image I went for this one was the idea of, sometimes you do need to let the prospects come to you. But again, because you've been hustling, because you've put your name out there and done so much, that over time, these leads will start to trickle into you. But you've got to set up that infrastructure to allow for that to happen. And then sometimes, again, that just might be some luck and circumstances, but you've got to create that. And oftentimes, you know, I think of a lead I got with Salesforce, or someone from Texas State University who I've been calling in to so many different departments, all the standard ones that I would call in. And then somebody from the IT security division that I would rarely talk to until you're well into implementing, or after you've sold a product. Now you start talking to the security team about how it's all going to get implemented. But this security person had been tasked with coming up with the email system for how Texas State was going to email all prospective freshman students. And so he messaged me on that one. And so I didn't do anything. I just got a call through our 800 number, actually called Salesforce's 800 number, which is unheard of. And they routed the lead to me. So, but Salesforce has marketing, they have advertising, he knows the company. So that helped, of course. But I did nothing, and that led to one of the biggest leads that I got, which, you know, didn't end up turning into quite the sale that we wanted, but it ended up turning into something small. So, and then I have one little note about RFPs. If any of you are dealing with RFPs, please read this section here. Won't have time for it now.
Hey, Rashad.
So we've only got, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, really quick. The note about LinkedIn, I think, is important, because I guarantee you, and this is not a criticism of you at all, but I guarantee you it was you that sent me the LinkedIn request. Like I was not, I'm sure, as an associate vice president, in the habit of running around and adding vendors to my LinkedIn profile. And most vendors that I interact with didn't do something like that, but you did. And that was absolutely, I remember watching as you moved on to the next opportunity, and then as you put your book together and as you published it, and because we'd had a good relationship and we'd had many conversations, I'd always found you interesting and very well learned, as again I think you're demonstrating today. That I was able to kind of keep that network there. And I think it's important for everybody out there in our group that's looking at, like, these are the ways that we help network. So if there are clients or referrals or other people that are coming in, don't just fall back on email to do that. Use the other social media outlets, use LinkedIn, use some of these other creative ways to connect with people, so that, like you said, that person with their feet up, you never know when someone might reach out to you and say, hey, I remember this, that, or the other thing, and maybe, could you help me out in this area? Because that actually has been really useful for us as a company, as Unique Venues, is those connections that we make there. And I know it's for a lot of our clients that are active in those communities, especially on LinkedIn, they can be really fruitful as well.
Yeah, it's amazing sometimes how when you're not trying to get something, then it ends up coming to you. I tried so hard for so long to sell you on something at Arizona, and it just didn't happen for a number of different reasons. And then through just, staying in touch more naturally and just being who I was, you offered me to do this webinar, and I was so thrilled, and I absolutely love doing this. I mean, this is the first real promotional thing I've done for this book. I published it almost 4 years ago, and my God, I wish I had done this a lot more, because I'm just thoroughly enjoying it. So, a lot of times the things, what you think you want in life, you get it, and then you realize, maybe it's not what I wanted. And then the thing that you want, you try so hard, and then it comes to you, and maybe you don't try to force it so much. And there are some things in this book that I talk about, just the idea of forcing, right? That can be a sign that maybe the MO that you're using is, there's something maybe to fix about that. I mean, forcing things is good, but also you kind of want to, push something a little bit and then let it sort of flow naturally, as opposed to like trying so hard to push that boulder, up the hill. So moving into chapter 5 here, I did something similar to the managers, the typical people that you're going to encounter when you're working decision makers. I think this is somewhat universal. You're going to have the first person, like in Joel's case, he was a point person. He was also a voter in this case, and probably a decision maker. I didn't know, because I never got to that stage where I made it to the, ultimately to the end where a decision was made, but certainly being quite involved. And then you got people that are talkers, and that, will give you as much information as possible, but they're not going to say anything about the actual process, who they want to vote for, or stand or talk loudly to the other people. That's where you want an advocate. And sometimes it's better to have one advocate than it is to have 10 voters, right? Because there are times where, I've sold, where I remember losing a sale at Owens Community College, a small college by Toledo, Ohio, where I had a lot of people. There were about 20 making the decision, and I knew I had about 12 votes in there. But one of the people that I didn't have was the loudest person, the one that just wouldn't stop till she got what she wanted. They come out of that vote, and I did not win because she just took over the meeting, and everyone had to sort of go with what she wanted. So find the advocate. That's the person that's going to help push your sale through. But you can really break down it into, determine the objectives. But again, the objectives are different than their why. And so here, your objective when I was selling floor coatings might be to have it non-slip and to make it look better. But what are they really looking for? Safe workers and compliance. It's a much different way to look at something. A preferred textbook, right? If it covers something another book does not cover, right? That's a feature, but the benefit is that, well, now I can let the book do that, and I can focus on what else I want to teach, right? There's a huge difference between features and benefits. So maybe think about whatever features your product has, and what does that feature actually do, right? Cruise control is a feature, but the benefit is that I can take my foot off the gas and let it relax when I'm doing a couple 100-mile road trip, right? The feature is that it can stay at the same mile per hour, but there's a benefit there, and that's what you want to focus on. And step 3, maybe the most important, maybe it comes before the first 2 steps, is the budget and when they're making a decision. And my God, how many times did I go through a process where I did not hammer home the budget? Who is paying for it? What's the process to make? Because that's everything. You can work this all the way up to the end and then find out, oh, we actually don't really have the money, or, oh, my wife makes a decision if I'm, with me, I can't make the decision now. I should have asked that at the very beginning, so I could have rescheduled the call when your wife was home, right? So there's a lot of that around budget and timing. And, I've got some stories in here about how I just did not do the best job in a lot of cases with really making sure that I knew the budget and how they were going to pay for it. So there's some other things. This book really does have a lot of good stuff in it. And another big thing is politics. That's a big part. The example I just gave of the advocate in that meeting, she played the politics. She went in there and other people knew politics because they didn't want to get on her bad side because that was going to cause them issues down the line. So, that might take a little bit more time, kind of getting to know everybody that in the decision process. Maybe if you get close to someone and they become, a quasi friend, maybe you can start to ask them about the politics, but you're probably going to figure it out pretty quickly because we all know politics has, a way of showing itself without really needing to try too hard. And I'd like this image. Unfortunately, it is tiny. But this is the guy taking one of the decision makers. Let's go talk in my office. And this guy's saying, where's he taking Bob? That's an actual silo that he's taken him into. So maybe not the best drawing on that one, but so just make sure. And I kind of close this out with one that's a little bit kind of dangerous, the idea of going over someone's head. If you do that, you can cause a lot of friction, and especially if there's a political side to it. But oftentimes, if you're not going to get the sale anyways, and it's looking like it's unlikely, that's a time where you can take a risk. And maybe if some point person is not letting you get to the decision making, everything goes through me. Well, you might have to create some tension and demand that you talk to that decision maker, right? I mean, again, create tension. And because if they're not going to let you talk to that DM anyways, you're not getting the sale. So why not take more of a risk? So that's where you're just going to have to figure out case by case basis what works best for you. So then I get into, I mentioned this chapter earlier, don't rush to demo. I love this quote. This came out of Anti-Fragile, right? There can be 1,000 white swans, does not prove that there's no black swan, right? But one black swan proves that not all swans are white. And he puts that in the idea of a black swan event, right? A black swan event is some sort of, chaotic, something of disorder, something that just totally crashes on your life. And so how are you going to react to that? How are you going to, because you never know what that chaos is going to be, but can you put yourself in a position where when the chaos comes, and he's a big investor. So he talks about how to invest yourself in a way where if the market crashes, well, not only are you not hurt, but you might actually benefit from that. So he talks about a lot of ways to do that. And the demo, I think, is just, can be a bad way to go about things because it can have a lot of the negative asymmetry. So I talked in the beginning about positive asymmetry. Well, the negative could be that, let's say that there's a technical difficulty. I mean, before Joel and I started this, I couldn't get my audio working. So can you imagine if this started, my audio wasn't working? You think I'm the worst salesperson on the planet. Terrible. I don't know what I'm doing. Joel doesn't know what he's doing, right? We've proved that too, that we don't know what we're doing. But if I, do the demo, maybe obviously that's going to help. But again, so the overall point I'm making is that just make sure if you're going to do that demo, and there's a time for it, of course, but maybe you want to do some other things like a pilot of your product, get referrals, maybe just send them a video. This is where I have the part about creating tension. And then, so then I'm getting in. So I know this time has flown by and only scheduled for another 10 minutes. So I just want to get to a couple of last things. I do love this chapter. I love that I was able to squeeze a line from my favorite poem, Khalil Gibran, if you ever can get a chance to read The Prophet. And so this is where it comes back again to the idea of just, do you love what you're doing? Because when you start talking price and you get into that, that's where you're really going to have to feel confident, not just in your solution, that you love the product, that it's really going to work for them because, things can get a little bit dicey when you're talking about price and negotiating things. I love this example that I talked about in Austin when I went into a clothing shop and someone was just asking me all these yes or no questions, things that were a bit one directional and not really putting those questions in a way where he had something to fall back on and then bring up the value as opposed to just the features that he was saying about the suit. So I know it's a little bit tough to explain. I'm rushing a little bit here. So I'll just slow it down and kind of hit what I wanted to get to. So I love this, made my favorite chapter in the book. Again, if there's one thing, don't email the proposal. And the image that I use, I love this. Actually, a guy, this is a ring next to him. It's a picture of his girlfriend, and it's an email to Beth saying, Beth, will you marry me? Love, Ray, right? So do not email the proposal. So I have another examples in here of 2 lost sales where I did that. I mentioned the one at Rice University, and there was another one here. I think it was, can't remember which school, but again, this book is filled with stories like this. And maybe no proposal at all is might be the way, because a lot of times we're so fixated on getting something down on paper, and yeah, eventually you're going to have to quantify it for your client, right? So they see everything that you're offering, they want to see the terms and conditions, they want to see your warranty. But oftentimes, if you're trying to get everything to the proposal, like you're trying to get everything to the demo, oftentimes now you've painted yourself in a corner instead of vetting out the situation as much as you can before you have to get to that end part of the process. And so I talk more about kind of letting things flow. So as we kind of wrap up, I'm just gonna kind of go quickly through these. A sale is never complete. This was a big part, guys. Look, I made a lot of mistakes. So I would oftentimes just make a sale. I remember I sold, if anybody's in Chicago, I don't know if they still have G&K services there, but it's a laundry company that had about 15 locations, and I sold one of them. This was just from a cold call. A 22-year-old kid takes the phone, called this laundromat. They decided to do a $20,000 floor resurfacing with us. This was a huge deal for me because they had 14 other locations that I could have sold. We set up to do the implementation on Saturday. I did not go. I got a call from the foreman who showed up halfway into the project saying that they had mispainted the lines because they were doing yellow lines about where employees should walk. And there were other things. They weren't conducting themselves in a professional manner, and he was furious. So I have to jump out of my seat, drive to the location, and fix the problem. What was I not doing? How was I not at the location, right? See the sale all the way through. And so this is going to be specific to your business. But, equate it to a realtor. A realtor should be at every buyer's home inspection, right? You should be there talking to the inspector, see the sale all the way through. So I like this image that I made, which probably should have been more of a football player, literally spiking the ball on the 2-yard line, which you've seen. But, this guy's saying, hey, you still got some work to do to get into the end zone. So there's a lot, things like implementation is a huge, huge way when you make the sale with someone. I know some, doing an event planning, right? If you schedule someone to do an event at a venue of yours, go to the event if you can, right? Make sure everything's okay. Be a part of it because the sale is not over once they've just signed the contract, right? There's a lot of other reasons in here. It's a good book when I can sneak a line from George Costanza in it. The whole idea of, changing jobs. Again, this is an inevitability that, especially in sales, if you're really good or if you're struggling, you may look to change jobs within an industry or changing industries altogether, which is, very difficult to do because you might have to start back at the bottom, but that's fine. So there's, reasons. And I had a nice chart in here that they did not put in this thing, but just the idea of weighing, again, the whole positive asymmetry aspect. If I take this new job, right, where you are now, you might be happy, but there's no real upside to it because you know what you're going to make, you know what you're going to expect, and you're kind of staying at a straight line on a graph. Whereas a new job has much more of an upside, even though you could fall flat after 2 years and hate it, there is that risk. Of course, there's usually a bigger upside. So just make sure there is a bigger upside if you're looking. So I actually included one of my performance improvement plans I got with Blackboard. The only one of my jobs where I was actually terminated, so I'm proud of that. And then the final 2 chapters, which we don't necessarily have to go through, but this is more of the life, a lot of the life aspect of it, relationships. I love this line from Seneca, an old Stoic philosopher, that, I could never separate the idea of a client or a prospect and a friend. I felt like it was impossible to merge the two. And so that made it really difficult on me. And I talk about, ways to build that relationship. In this story here, which I think is a good way to close with this story. When I was working for an ad agency, I emailed the media agency of Office Depot to see if they had an upcoming holiday special where they were going to do more online advertising and could they do their ads with us. He responded, invited me into his office, gave us the business, which was like unheard of for an agency to invite you in after one email, tell you were going to get the business. I walked back into my office like a rock star, as smug as you can possibly be, thinking I was, just hot stuff. I emailed him a few days later. I say, he's sending us the contract back. And he says, well, actually the proposal, when I showed it to my current vendor, they ended up lowering the price to where you were, and I'm going to stick with them. Right. Absolutely terrible that after he told me they were going to sell or use my product, that I did not immediately take him out. Right. And I put the line up here, take him out to one of the best steakhouses in Chicago or at a Cubs game, and party it up with him. If he turns it down, something's up. People usually don't turn down stuff like this. And maybe my favorite line in the whole book is that bonds can really be formed when you're helping someone throw up directly into the toilet. Right. So just this idea of find ways, it doesn't have to be that extreme. I don't even drink personally, but once he told me that, relationship, I should have been in there, should have said, let's go out and celebrate, thank you. But instead I just assumed it was closed and he switched back to the competitor. So I still kind of cringe when I think of that one. And then the last chapter, ethics. Any Pink Floyd fans out there, listen to the song Dogs. And it talks about more of the ethical side of it. And so that's the book. So wow, that was a fast and furious 58 minutes, but I really hope that you all learned something, that you got, again, one or two things out of this that can help you become a better salesperson, that can help you have success. And if there's anything, I've just put up my email address here for anyone that wants to reach out, questions, feedback, comments, anything. Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Joel, for setting this up.
No problem. And thank you. And
yeah.
I appreciate, again, we always talk about this, but an hour goes so fast. You think an hour seems like it's forever, and it just flies by fast as ever. And I will, Rashad's typing it in here, I will also include a link to it so that if you're interested in his book, you can pick that up. I'll also add the reference to Anti-Fragile, since that's a big recommendation as well out there, in case some people missed that one earlier in the thing. I just want to thank you for taking the time to go through it. It does resonate with me, again, thinking through a lot of the things that we do, especially right now during a pandemic. I mean, your point about calling people instead of emailing is so important, and yet during a pandemic it's been even harder, because everyone was sent home to work remotely and their office phones don't ring at home, right? They're just ringing in empty space now. And so it's been extra hard for the last 15 months for all of us to make some of those personal connections. Or again, we're not able to swing by, and like, I can't wait until I can go drive Phoenix and San Diego and LA, which is part of my territory for unique venues, and drop in on people and see them and all that. Because right now, all I can do is use Zoom or an email message or something like that to make it happen. So I think even more important right now, coming out of the pandemic, and knowing that we all have a lot of sales activities to do to refill and rebuild our pipelines and to get ready to kind of get all that activity going again, is to think through what are the easy to avoid mistakes that we might make in there. And I think you've illustrated some very important points for us all to think about as we go through that. So thank you for that very much. Everybody that's still with us, thank you very much. I'm going to throw my screen up one last time here and make sure that I do the right one, so that it's the presenter one and not the, there we go. So we will share that, and we will move on to just a reminder to everybody, we have a few more webinars coming up in the month of May. We have a new one we just added. It's on our resources page. It's social media management. It's on May 18th, and this one's at 12:30 Eastern. I know we normally go 2 p.m., but this one, due to staff schedules, is a little bit earlier in the day. For our clients, member group therapy, you got your invite again today in your educational programming update that was just emailed to you a little bit ago. It's on May 18th. We're going to talk about customer service options during the time of restricted events. Our industry expert panel is on May 20th. We're going to talk in this third one about building your travel team. So many people had to lay off or furlough or downsize their teams, and we're going to have to start back up and get a lot of those people on board, and maybe they're not all there any longer. Maybe you're going to think about reorganizing or thinking a little bit differently about your team. And ultimately, we'll have someone on that can talk a little bit about what to expect in a labor market like we're experiencing right now. And then finally, for you planners on the call, our planner roundtable, again, also talking about customer service options for restricted events. That's on May 25th. And so with that, I will go ahead and thank everyone again for being here. Thank you, Rashad, for being our guest presenter today. We really appreciate your time. And we will see you all on a future webinar with unique venues. Everyone have a great afternoon. Take care.